A tension-filled afternoon at Grayson's grocery. The quiet neighborhood of Bellwood was home to many small businesses, but none were as well known as Grayson's grocery. Nestled at the corner of a bustling street, it had been a staple in the community for decades. The store was managed by its namesake, Mr. Edward Grayson, a man in his late 50s with a steely gaze and an old-fashioned sense of pride. He believed that a sharp eye and firm hand were the cornerstones of a successful business. It was an unusually busy Tuesday afternoon. The store was packed with customers chatting and browsing the aisles. Behind the counter, Mr. Grayson stood, his keen eyes scanning the room. He prided himself on maintaining control of his space. For years, his regular customers had gotten used to his stern demeanor, and most paid him no mind. However, today, Mr. Grayson's attention was more intense than usual. The bell above the door jingled, and Darius King, a young, sharply dressed black man, stepped into the store. He was in his mid-20s, with a calm yet confident air about him. Darius wore a crisp white shirt tucked into slacks, a leather strap slung over one shoulder supporting his sleek laptop bag. He greeted the cashier with a polite nod before grabbing a shopping basket near the entrance. Mr. Grayson stiffened. He didn't recognize Darius, and new faces always made him uneasy. His years of running the store had ingrained in him an instinct to evaluate everyone who entered. And today, something about Darius made him particularly uncomfortable. Darius moved methodically through the aisles, pulling out his phone now and then to update a digital grocery list. His basket quickly filled with everyday essentials: bread, canned soup, a carton of milk. He hummed softly as he browsed, unaware of the intense scrutiny directed at him from behind the counter. Grayson's paranoia mounted. He couldn't stop glancing at Darius and muttering under his breath, "What's he doing with that phone? Is he casing the place?" He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. As Darius reached for a jar of peanut butter, Mr. Grayson decided he'd seen enough. He stepped out from behind the counter, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. Other customers watched curiously as he marched toward the unsuspecting shopper. "Hey, Hugh," Mr. Grayson barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the store. Darius turned, startled. "Yes," he replied, his tone polite but puzzled. Grayson gestured toward Darius's bag. "What are you doing with that? What's in there?" Darius blinked, confused. "Excuse me. You heard me. That bag of yours. You think I didn't notice you sneaking looks around the store, stuffing things in there?" Grayson's voice was loud enough to draw the attention of nearly everyone in the store. Darius's brows furrowed. "I'm not stealing anything," he said firmly. He placed the basket on the ground and swung the bag off his shoulder. "If you want, you can look inside. It's just my work stuff." But Grayson wasn't having it. He waved Darius off and crossed his arms. "I know how this works. People like you think they can walk in here and take whatever they want. Well, not in my store." The implication in his words was unmistakable. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances, while others pulled out their phones, recording the heated exchange. Darius's calm demeanor shifted. His voice dropped, firm yet controlled. "People like me. Sir, I've done nothing wrong. I'm just here to buy groceries." "That's what they all say," Grayson retorted, his face red with indignation. Without another word, he stomped back to the counter and picked up the phone. "I'm calling the police," he announced, his voice echoing through the now silent store. "We'll settle this properly." Darius stood frozen, his heart racing. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the situation was spiraling out of control. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He could feel the weight of the other customers' stares, some sympathetic, others judging. He took a deep breath and prepared for whatever was about to unfold. The arrival of the police. The minutes stretched endlessly as sirens blared in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Darius remained where he was, his basket of groceries sitting on the floor beside him. A mother holding her child whispered something to her husband, and another customer discreetly recorded the scene on her phone. The bell above the door chimed again, this time signaling the arrival of 2 uniformed police officers. They stepped inside, their hands resting on their belts as they surveyed the tense atmosphere. Grayson wasted no time rushing to them. "This man," he said, pointing an accusatory finger at Darius, "has been sneaking around my store, acting suspicious. I caught him trying to steal." The taller officer, whose name badge read State Turner, raised a hand to stop Grayson's tirade. "We'll handle this, sir," he said calmly. Turning to Darius, he asked, "Would you mind explaining your side of the story?" Darius met the officer's gaze, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I'm here to shop. I have a list, and I've been checking it on my phone. That's it. He accused me of stealing without any evidence." "Skeet." Turner nodded and gestured toward Darius's bag. "Do you mind if we take a look?" Darius handed over the bag without hesitation. Inside, the officers found exactly what he had described: a laptop, charger, notebook, and a water bottle. No stolen items, no evidence of wrongdoing. "Well?" Turner asked Grayson. "Did you actually see him take anything?" Grayson hesitated. "No," he admitted reluctantly. "But I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's up to no good." Before the officer could respond, the customer recording the scene stepped forward. "I got everything on video," she said. "This young man hasn't done anything wrong. He's just been shopping." The officers reviewed the footage, their expressions growing more serious by the second. "Skeet." Turner turned to Grayson, his tone firm. "There's no evidence here of any theft. You made an unfounded accusation." Grayson's face flushed with embarrassment, but he refused to back down. "I was just protecting my store," he muttered. Consequences began to unfold. As the police left, assuring Darius he was free to go, the atmosphere in the store shifted. Customers began murmuring among themselves, some glaring openly at Grayson. A few started putting their items back on the shelves and walking out. Darius, though shaken, held his head high as he exited the store. Outside, the woman who had recorded the video approached him. "I'm going to share this online," she said. "People need to see what happened." Darius hesitated but then nodded. "Do it," he said. "This isn't just about me." As the video began to spread, Grayson's world began to unravel. By the time the sun set, the store was emptier than it had ever been, and whispers of a boycott had already started to circulate. Little did Grayson know, this was only the beginning of a reckoning that would force him to confront not just his prejudices, but the very foundation of how he had run his business for decades. A storm brews online and in the community. That evening, as dusk settled over Bellwood, Grayson's grocery stood eerily quiet. Inside, Mr. Edward Grayson sat at the counter, his mind replaying the events of the afternoon. He tapped his fingers against the wooden surface, each click louder than the last in the otherwise silent store. Customers had left in a huff, some without even buying the groceries they had picked up. Others had stared him down with open disdain before walking out. The store had weathered many challenges in its decades of operation, but this felt different. This felt personal. When Grayson finally locked up for the night and returned home, he turned on the television, seeking a distraction. But even the evening news didn't provide solace. The incident at his store had already made its way into the local broadcast, with a short clip of Darius standing in the store while the police questioned him. The reporter's voice was calm but critical. A video posted online today has sparked outrage in the Bellwood community. The footage shows a local store owner accusing a young black customer, Darius King, of theft without evidence. The incident raises concerns about racial profiling and discrimination in small businesses. Grayson's jaw clenched as the screen flashed a clip of himself speaking to the police, followed by the face of Darius King, calm and composed despite the tension. Racial profiling. Grayson muttered under his breath. That's not what this was about. But even as he tried to justify his actions, doubt began to creep in. Had he been too quick to assume? His pride wouldn't let him admit it. He grabbed his phone to check social media. something he rarely did, and typed in the name of his store. His heart sank. The video had gone viral, with thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Many were calling for a boycott of Grayson's Grocery. Some shared their own negative experiences at the store, recounting similar instances of being unfairly scrutinized or treated rudely. This isn't the first time Grayson's Grocery has been accused of this kind of behavior. I stopped shopping there years ago because of how uncomfortable he made me feel. Why is this man still in business? The community deserves better. Darius handled this with more grace than I ever could. Good on him for staying calm, but Grayson needs to face consequences. Grayson's hands trembled as he scrolled through the comments, each one feeling like a blow to his ego. He quickly exited the app and tossed his phone onto the couch, but the damage was already done. The weight of public opinion pressed down on him, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of fear for the future of his business. The next morning, by sunrise, the video had gained even more traction. Local activists had picked it up, and several prominent voices in the Bellwood community were planning to take action. Darius woke up to a flood of messages on his phone. Most were from friends and family offering their support. Some were from strangers who had seen the video online and wanted to thank him for staying calm and dignified in such a tense situation. One message stood out. It was from Monica Pearson, the leader of the Bellwood Community Action Group, a local organization dedicated to promoting equality and fighting discrimination. "Hey Darius," the message read. "We saw the video of what happened to you at Grayson's Grocery. This isn't just about one incident. It's part of a larger problem. We're organizing a peaceful protest outside the store tomorrow morning. If you're comfortable, we'd love for you to join us and share your story." Darius hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to be at the center of a public demonstration, but then he thought about the way Grayson had looked at him, as if his mere presence was a threat. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of how they looked. He typed a response. "I'll be there." The protest. The next morning, Mr. Grayson arrived at his store early, determined to act as if everything was normal. But as he rounded the corner, his heart sank. A small group of people had gathered outside the store, holding signs with phrases like "Stop racial profiling," "Boycott Grayson's Grocery," and "Equal treatment for all." Some were chanting, while others handed out flyers to passersby. At the center of the group stood Darius King, holding a simple sign that read "Justice Matters." Grayson's face turned red as he approached the door. "What is this nonsense?" he muttered under his breath. He fumbled with his keys, ignoring the pointed stares of the protesters. "Mr. Grayson," Monica Pearson called out, stepping forward. "Do you have a moment to speak with us?" Grayson ignored her, pushing the door open and stepping inside. He slammed the door behind him, but the sound of the protesters chanting outside followed him like a shadow. Customers take notice. As the morning went on, the protest outside the store grew. More people joined, and several local news crews arrived to cover the demonstration. Grayson peeked out the window and saw familiar faces in the crowd, longtime customers who had once been loyal to his store. Inside, the store was almost empty. A few customers trickled in, but their visits were brief. Some left without buying anything, while others hesitated at the door before turning away. Even Sophie, his former cashier, had joined the protest. She stood next to Darius, holding a sign that read, "We deserve better." Grayson's frustration boiled over. He stormed outside, his voice shaking with anger. "What are you all doing here?" he shouted. "This is my store, my livelihood. You can't just stand here and scare off my customers." Darius stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. "Mr. Grayson, no one's trying to take your store away. But you need to understand the harm you've caused. You accused me of something I didn't do because of the way I look. That's not just bad business, it's wrong." The crowd murmured in agreement. Grayson's face flushed, but he refused to back down. "I was just protecting my store," he snapped. "I didn't mean anything by it." Monica Pearson interjected, her tone firm but measured. Intent doesn't erase impact, Mr. Grayson. The way you treated Darius wasn't just about one moment. It's part of a larger pattern. And the community is tired of it. A community stands together. As the day went on, the protest gained more attention. Social media buzzed with updates from the scene, and local news channels broadcasted live segments. People from neighboring communities showed up to join the demonstration, their voices adding to the chorus of calls for accountability. Inside the store, Grayson felt trapped. He watched helplessly as his reputation crumbled before his eyes. For decades, he had run his business the same way, convinced that his methods were justified. Now, he was being forced to confront the harsh reality that times had changed, and he had failed to change with them. By the end of the day, Grayson's grocery was nearly deserted. The once busy aisles were empty, the cash register silent. Grayson sat behind the counter, his head in his hands, as the weight of his actions finally began to sink in. Outside, Darius and the other protesters continued to stand their ground, their voices echoing through the streets. It wasn't just about one store or one man. It was about building a better, fairer community for everyone. And for the first time in his life, Edward Grayson began to wonder if he had been wrong all along. The ripple effect of truth. The third day after the incident began like any other for most residents of Bellwood, but not for Edward Grayson. His life had shifted dramatically, and his once thriving business was at the center of a storm he couldn't escape. The viral video had gained even more traction overnight, now with tens of thousands of views and national attention. It wasn't just about his store anymore. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with prejudice in small-town America. Edward sat at his dining table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, staring blankly at his phone. Notifications flooded the screen, angry messages, reviews, and even threats. His store's page, once filled with mundane praise for its classic charm and well-stocked shelves, was now littered with one-star reviews and scathing comments. "This isn't just a boycott. It's a reckoning," read one post that had garnered thousands of likes. The comments beneath were even harsher. "People like Grayson shouldn't have a place in our communities. Good riddance to racist business owners. Support the protest. Let's build a better Bellwood." Grayson sighed deeply, running his hand through his thinning gray hair. He hadn't left his house since locking up the store the night before. The thought of facing the protesters, who, he had learned, planned to continue their peaceful demonstration, made his stomach churn. The protest grows. By mid-morning, the number of protesters outside Grayson's grocery had doubled. Local activists, families, students, and even clergy had joined, their voices rising in unison. Signs with bold messages lined the street, and people handed out flyers detailing the incident and calling for change. Darius King stood near the center of the crowd, his calm demeanor drawing others to him. For someone who had been thrust into the spotlight unexpectedly, he carried himself with grace. Monica Pearson, the leader of the Bellwood Community Action Group, stood by his side, strategizing the next steps. "Darius," Monica said, her voice low but firm, "the media's starting to pay attention. We've got reporters asking for interviews. Are you ready for this?" Darius paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He hadn't sought this kind of attention. All he'd wanted was to stand up for himself and others who'd been mistreated. But now, the movement had grown beyond him. He looked at the crowd, young and old, black and white, standing together, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll do it," he said finally. "If it helps bring change, I'll do whatever I can." An unexpected ally. Inside the store, Grayson struggled to go about his day. He had opened the doors reluctantly, hoping that the situation would somehow blow over, but few customers entered. Those who did kept their interactions short, avoiding eye contact. Grayson could feel the tension in the air like a physical weight pressing down on him. Around noon, the bell above the door jingled. Grayson looked up, half expecting another angry customer or even a journalist. Instead, he saw a familiar face, Pastor Samuel Green, a respected leader in the community and one of Grayson's oldest acquaintances. "Sam," Grayson said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Pastor Green removed his hat and approached the counter slowly. His face was a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Edward," he began, his deep voice steady, "we need to talk." Grayson stiffened. "If you're here to lecture me, I've heard enough already." "I'm not here to lecture," Green replied. "I'm here to help you understand what you've done and how you can fix it." "I didn't do anything wrong," Grayson snapped, his frustration bubbling over. "That young man was acting suspicious, and I acted accordingly. I was protecting my store." Green's gaze didn't waver. "Protecting it from what?" "A man shopping for groceries. Edward, I've known you for a long time, but what you did wasn't about protecting your business. It was about fear. And that fear has cost you more than you realize." Grayson opened his mouth to argue but found himself unable to form the words. Deep down, a part of him knew Green was right. He lowered his gaze, his hands gripping the counter tightly. Green continued, his tone softening. "This isn't just about your store, Edward. It's about the community you serve. You've lost their trust, and if you want to earn it back, you need to start by admitting you were wrong." Grayson shook his head slowly. "I don't know how to fix this, Sam. The damage is already done." "Then start with an apology," Green said firmly. "Not just to Darius, but to everyone you've wronged, knowingly or unknowingly. And after that, listen. Listen to the voices outside. They're not here to destroy you, Edward. They're here to demand change." Darius takes the stage. That afternoon, a local news station set up a small platform near the protest. A microphone was handed to Darius, who stood nervously before the growing crowd. Cameras from various outlets were pointed at him, their lenses capturing every movement. He cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the pressure. "I want to thank everyone who's come out to support this movement," he began. "This isn't just about me or what happened at Grayson's grocery. It's about making sure no one in this community ever feels like they don't belong." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Darius took a deep breath before continuing. "I grew up here in Bellwood. This is my home. And like many of you, I've faced moments where I felt judged, not for my actions, but for the color of my skin. What happened at that store wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger issue that we all need to confront." His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I don't hate Mr. Grayson. I don't want to see his business fail, but I do want him, and others like him, to understand that actions have consequences, words have power, and the way we treat each other matters." The community speaks. As Darius stepped down, other members of the community took turns sharing their stories. A young woman recounted how she'd been followed around Grayson's store as a teenager, accused of loitering when she was simply waiting for her mother. An elderly man spoke about how he'd stopped shopping there years ago because of Grayson's brusque and dismissive attitude. Each story added fuel to the fire, painting a picture of a business owner who had let fear and prejudice cloud his judgment for far too long. From inside the store, Grayson watched through the window, his chest tightening with every word. For years, he had convinced himself that his methods were fair, that his instincts were always right. But now, faced with the voices of those he had wronged, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. A step toward redemption. As the sun began to set, Grayson made a decision that would change the course of his life and his business forever. He stepped outside, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the platform. The crowd grew quiet, their eyes fixed on him. "I'd like to say something," he said, his voice cracking. Monica Pearson exchanged a glance with Darius before handing Grayson the microphone. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. "I spent the last few days telling myself I didn't do anything wrong. But the truth is I did. I let my assumptions and my fears get the better of me, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." The crowd murmured, their expressions ranging from skepticism to cautious optimism. "I owe Darius, and all of you, an apology," Grayson continued. I see now that my actions have caused pain not just to one person but to an entire community. I can't change the past, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The silence that followed was deafening. Grayson handed the microphone back to Monica and stood there, exposed and vulnerable, waiting for the crowd's judgment. And then, slowly but surely, the murmurs turned to applause. It wasn't unanimous, and it wasn't thunderous, but it was a start. For the first time in years, Edward Grayson felt the weight of his pride begin to lift. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was finally ready to walk it. Redemption begins with hard conversations. As the applause faded, Edward Grayson stood on the platform, his face flushed with emotion. The crowd's reaction wasn't unanimous, but the tentative support from some gave him a glimmer of hope. He knew, however, that words alone wouldn't fix what he had broken. Apologies were just the beginning. Actions had to follow, and they had to be meaningful. The protesters dispersed slowly, some skeptical and others curious about what Grayson would do next. Darius King watched as Grayson stepped down from the platform, his expression unreadable. Grayson hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Darius," Grayson said, his voice soft but steady, "I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was wrong, and I see that now. But I want to make this right. If you're willing, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how I can start." Darius tilted his head, studying Grayson carefully. He didn't speak right away, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. Finally, he nodded. "I'll meet with you. But not just me. Monica and others in the community need to be part of this. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about how you've treated this neighborhood for years." Grayson swallowed hard, realizing the magnitude of what Darius was asking. It wasn't just about one conversation or a token gesture. It was about fundamentally changing how he operated, not just as a business owner, but as a person. "I understand," Grayson said quietly. "Let's set it up." Facing the community. 2 days later, Grayson sat in the small conference room of the Bellwood Community Center. The space was modest but functional, with folding chairs arranged in a circle. Around him sat members of the Bellwood Community Action Group, including Monica Pearson, Darius, and several others who had been vocal during the protest. Each face was a reminder of the harm he had caused, and Grayson felt the weight of their collective gaze. Monica opened the meeting. "Edward, this is an opportunity for you to listen. The people here have stories to share, experiences that you need to hear. After that, we'll discuss ways to move forward. But first, we need to understand each other." Grayson nodded, his hands folded tightly in his lap. "I'm ready to listen." One by one, members of the group shared their experiences. A single mother recounted how Grayson had once accused her teenage son of loitering, even though he had been waiting outside the store with a receipt in hand. An elderly woman spoke of feeling unwelcome at the store, ignored while others received polite greetings. "Your store has been part of this neighborhood for decades," said a young man named Jamal, his voice firm. "But you've treated it like your personal kingdom. People aren't customers to you. They're suspects. You've built a wall between yourself and this community, and it's time to tear it down." Grayson sat in silence, absorbing the words. Each story was like a mirror, reflecting back parts of himself he hadn't wanted to see. By the time the last person spoke, his hands were trembling. "I didn't realize how much harm I'd caused," Grayson said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself I was protecting my business, but I see now that I was protecting my own biases. I can't change the past, but I want to earn back your trust. A plan for change." The room grew quiet as Monica leaned forward. "If you're serious about change, Edward, here's what we propose." She outlined a plan that was as challenging as it was necessary. Grayson would implement a series of changes at his store, starting with anti-bias training for himself and any future employees. He would also create a community advisory board, composed of local residents, to provide ongoing feedback on how the store could better serve the neighborhood. In addition, Monica suggested a partnership with local organizations to support underserved residents. You could host donation drives, sponsor community events, or even offer discounts to families in need, she said. Actions like these show that you're not just here to profit. You're here to be part of the community. Grayson nodded, his mind racing with the implications. It was a lot to take in, but he knew it was necessary. I'll do it, he said. All of it. Darius, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke. This isn't going to be easy, Mr. Grayson. People are hurt. They're angry. Some might never come back to your store. But if you're willing to put in the work, you might be able to rebuild something better. Grayson met Darius's gaze and nodded. Thank you, he said, for giving me a chance. The first steps. The next week marked the beginning of Grayson's journey toward redemption. He closed the store temporarily, posting a sign on the door that read, "Closed for renovation and reflection. We're working to serve you better." Inside, Grayson began making changes. He attended anti-bias training sessions organized by the Bellwood Community Action Group, where he learned about the harmful effects of racial profiling and the importance of cultural competency. He listened to speakers share their experiences of discrimination, each story deepening his understanding of the pain he had caused. Grayson also reached out to local contractors to renovate the store. He wanted the space to feel welcoming, with brighter lighting, wider aisles, and a new seating area where customers could relax. Meanwhile, Monica and Darius worked with the Community Advisory Board to plan the store's reopening. They suggested hosting a community open house, where Grayson could publicly apologize and outline his plans for the future. It would be a risky move, one that could either solidify his commitment or backfire spectacularly. A risky reopening. The day of the open house arrived, and Grayson stood outside the freshly painted storefront, his heart pounding. The crowd that had gathered was larger than he expected, with news cameras once again present to document the event. Grayson stepped onto a small stage set up near the entrance. He held a microphone in his hand, his palms slick with sweat. Taking a deep breath, he began. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "A few weeks ago, I made a terrible mistake. I let my assumptions and prejudices hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Darius, I'm sorry." He turned to Darius, who stood near the front of the crowd. Darius nodded solemnly but didn't speak. Grayson continued, addressing the larger audience. "I spent these past weeks reflecting on my actions and listening to the stories of those I've hurt. It's been painful, but it's also been necessary. I see now that I've let my fears dictate how I've run this store and how I've treated this community. That ends today." He outlined the changes he planned to implement, from the Community Advisory Board to the new partnerships with local organizations. "This store isn't just mine," he said. "It belongs to all of you, and I'm committed to making it a place where everyone feels welcome." When he finished, the crowd was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the gathering. It wasn't unanimous, and it wasn't deafening, but it was real. Grayson stepped down from the stage, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. The beginning of a new chapter. As the open house continued, neighbors who had once avoided the store began to step inside, curious about the changes. They mingled with Grayson, offering tentative words of encouragement or cautious critiques. Darius stayed for a while, observing the interactions before quietly slipping away. For Grayson, the day marked not just the reopening of his store, but the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he could work to build something better, one step, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. And in the quiet moments that followed, as the sun set over Bellwood, Edward Grayson allowed himself to believe that redemption was possible. The struggle to rebuild trust. The days following the reopening of Grayson's grocery were anything but smooth. While some members of the Bellwood community were cautiously optimistic about the changes, others were openly skeptical or outright dismissive. Edward Grayson found himself at the center of a storm, one he had caused but wasn't entirely sure how to navigate. The store saw only a trickle of customers each day. Regulars who had frequented the shop for years now avoided it, and the protesters outside, though fewer in number, were a constant reminder of the distrust Grayson had fostered over decades. For every step forward, it seemed there were 2 steps back. Grayson spent most of his time on the floor, interacting directly with the few customers who came in. It was uncomfortable work. Every interaction felt like a test. Every conversation, a chance to be judged. He greeted everyone with a smile, his tone softer than it had ever been. But smiles and politeness couldn't erase years of mistrust overnight. One afternoon, a woman in her 30s walked in with her young daughter. Grayson recognized her immediately. Linda Torres, a longtime resident of Bellwood who had stopped shopping at his store years ago. Linda moved cautiously through the aisles, her daughter holding her hand tightly. "Linda," Grayson said softly as she approached the counter with a small basket of items. "It's been a while. How have you been?" She hesitated, her expression wary. "I'm fine," she replied curtly. Grayson nodded, ringing up her items. "I'm glad to see you here again. It means a lot." Linda didn't respond, but as she handed over her cash, she looked him directly in the eye. "I'm giving you a chance, Mr. Grayson. Don't waste it." Her words stayed with him long after she left, a reminder that rebuilding trust wasn't just about apologies or promises. It was about consistent action, a new approach. Recognizing that he needed to do more, Grayson reached out to Monica Pearson and the Community Advisory Board. They convened a meeting in the store after hours, sitting around a table in what was once the storage area. "I need help," Grayson admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've made changes, I've apologized, but people still don't trust me. What more can I do?" Monica leaned forward, her tone measured. "Edward, trust isn't something you can rush. It's built over time through consistent effort. The community doesn't just need to hear your words, they need to see your actions." Jamal, a member of the advisory board, chimed in. "What about hosting events here? Bring people together in a positive way. Show them that this store isn't just a business, it's part of the neighborhood." Grayson nodded slowly. "What kind of events?" Darius, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "Why not host a community dinner? Invite everyone, no strings attached. Let people see the changes for themselves, and see you in a different light." The idea resonated with Grayson. He agreed to host the event the following weekend, determined to make it a success. The community dinner. The night of the community dinner arrived, and Grayson was a bundle of nerves. The store had been transformed into a welcoming space, with long tables set up in the aisles and strings of warm lights hanging overhead. Volunteers from the advisory board had helped prepare the food. Simple but hearty dishes like pasta, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. As the clock struck 6, the first guests began to arrive. Grayson greeted each one personally, his smile genuine but tinged with nervousness. To his surprise, the turnout was better than he had expected. Families, students, and seniors filled the store, their conversations creating a lively hum. Darius arrived with a group of friends, his presence adding an air of legitimacy to the event. Grayson approached him cautiously. "Thank you for coming," he said. Darius nodded. "I told you I'd give you a chance. This is a good start." The dinner progressed smoothly, with neighbors mingling and sharing stories over plates of food. For the first time in weeks, Grayson felt a sense of hope. He moved through the crowd, engaging in conversations and listening to feedback. Toward the end of the evening, Monica called for everyone's attention. "Tonight's dinner isn't just about food," she said. "It's about building bridges. Edward has taken some important first steps, but there's still work to be done. This is our chance to hold each other accountable and create a better community." The crowd responded with applause, and Grayson felt a lump rise in his throat. Confronting the past. As the evening wound down, and the last guests began to leave, a man approached Grayson. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. Grayson recognized him as Robert Lee, a former customer who had stopped coming to the store years ago after a tense altercation. "Mr. Lee," Grayson said, his voice cautious. Lee studied him for a moment before speaking. "Edward, I wasn't sure I'd ever step foot in this place again, but my wife convinced me to come tonight. She said people can change, even you." Grayson felt a pang of guilt. He remembered their last interaction vividly, how he had accused Lee's teenage son of stealing when it turned out the boy had done nothing wrong. "I owe you an apology," Grayson said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was wrong about your son, and I was wrong about so many others. I'm sorry for the pain I caused." Lee's expression softened slightly. "It's going to take more than words, Edward. But tonight was a step in the right direction. Keep walking that path." A glimpse of progress. The community dinner marked a turning point for Grayson. While it didn't erase the damage of the past, it opened a door to new possibilities. In the weeks that followed, the store saw a gradual increase in customers. Some were curious to see the changes, while others were drawn by the positive buzz surrounding the dinner. Grayson continued to work closely with the advisory board, hosting monthly events and donating a portion of his profits to local causes. He also began mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing his hard-learned lessons about running a business and the importance of humility and community engagement. One day, as Grayson stood behind the counter, a group of teenagers entered the store, laughing and chatting. Among them was a boy wearing a hoodie and carrying a basketball. Grayson felt a flicker of his old instincts but quickly pushed it aside. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone warm. The boy looked surprised but smiled. "Hey, thanks," he replied. As they moved through the aisles, Grayson watched them with a sense of quiet pride. He was learning, slowly, imperfectly, but surely. For the first time in years, Grayson's grocery didn't feel like just a store. It felt like part of the community again. And for Edward Grayson, that was worth everything. Uneasy steps toward healing. The gradual changes at Grayson's grocery began to ripple through the Bellwood community, though not without resistance. The scars of Grayson's past actions ran deep, and for some, they felt irreparable. But Edward Grayson was determined to press forward, knowing that every step, no matter how small, mattered. After the success of the community dinner, Grayson threw himself into new initiatives. He worked tirelessly with Monica Pearson and the advisory board, leaning on their guidance and expertise. Though the learning curve was steep, he remained committed, even when the process forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his biases and shortcomings. The critics' return. The newfound attention on Grayson's efforts drew a mix of responses. While some applauded his willingness to change, others were less forgiving. Social media remained a battleground, with some users accusing him of merely putting on a show to save his failing business. "This is just damage control," one comment read. "Why should we support someone who only apologized after getting caught?" Grayson read each comment with a heavy heart, but he refused to respond. He knew his actions had to speak louder than his words, and he was prepared for the long haul. Still, the criticism stung, a reminder that redemption wouldn't come easily. One particularly vocal critic was Ruth Daniels, a local teacher who had boycotted the store for years. Ruth had been among the protesters during the initial weeks and had no plans to return. When Monica suggested inviting Ruth to an upcoming meeting at the store, Grayson hesitated. "She hates me," he said. "Why would she even come?" "Because she cares about this community," Monica replied. "If you're serious about change, you need to engage with people like Ruth. The ones who hold you accountable are the ones who make you better." Grayson reluctantly agreed, and Monica extended the invitation. To his surprise, Ruth accepted. A meeting of opposites. The meeting took place on a quiet Thursday evening, with Ruth arriving right on time. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with a commanding presence that immediately filled the room. Grayson felt a knot tighten in his stomach as she sat down, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice careful. Ruth folded her arms. "I'm not here to make small talk, Edward. I'm here to make sure you understand the damage you've done and the work you still have ahead of you." Grayson nodded, bracing himself. "I'm ready to listen." For the next hour, Ruth didn't hold back. She recounted her own experiences of feeling unwelcome at the store, as well as stories she'd heard from her students and their families. She spoke of the ripple effect Grayson's actions had on the community, the way his attitude had created an atmosphere of exclusion and mistrust. "You can't undo years of harm with one community dinner," Ruth said, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Real change takes time, consistency, and humility. Are you ready for that?" "I am," Grayson replied, his voice steady. "I know I can't fix this overnight, but I'm committed to doing better, for as long as it takes." Ruth studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "We'll see." A growing network. With Ruth's guarded approval, Grayson began to gain traction in his efforts to rebuild. She joined the advisory board, becoming one of its most vocal members, and her involvement lent credibility to his initiatives. Together with Monica, Darius, and the rest of the board, they worked to expand the store's outreach. One of their first projects was a neighborhood food drive, aimed at supporting families in need. Grayson donated shelf space to collect non-perishable goods, and the response from the community was overwhelming. Within days, the bins were overflowing, and volunteers from all walks of life came together to sort and distribute the donations. Grayson was deeply moved by the experience. Standing alongside neighbors he had once alienated, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, he understood what Monica had meant when she said the store belonged to the community. It wasn't just a place to buy groceries. It was a hub for connection and support. Facing the next challenge, while progress was being made, Grayson knew that his journey was far from over. The community was watching his every move, waiting to see if his commitment would waver. And as his business slowly began to recover, he faced another unexpected challenge: a competitor. A new grocery store had opened on the other side of Bellwood, a sleek, modern establishment with better prices and a reputation for inclusivity. It quickly became popular, drawing away even some of the customers who had begun returning to Grayson's store. At first, Grayson panicked. He feared that all his hard work would be for nothing if the store couldn't survive financially. But Monica reminded him of the bigger picture. "This isn't about competing with other stores," she said. "It's about staying true to your mission. If you focus on serving the community, the rest will follow." Taking her advice to heart, Grayson doubled down on his efforts to connect with the neighborhood. He launched a community discount program, offering reduced prices to low-income families, and began hosting weekly cooking classes in partnership with local chefs. The classes quickly became a hit, drawing families, students, and seniors alike. A moment of grace. One evening, as Grayson was locking up the store, he noticed a figure lingering near the entrance. It was Jamal, the young man from the advisory board who had often challenged him during meetings. "Jamal," Grayson said, surprised. "What brings you here so late?" Jamal hesitated, then shrugged. "Just wanted to say, you're doing okay." Grayson smiled, touched by the unexpected compliment. "Thank you. That means a lot." Jamal nodded but didn't leave. After a moment, he added, "You know, I wasn't sure you'd stick it out. A lot of people wouldn't." Grayson looked down, his voice quiet. "I almost didn't, but this community deserves better, and so do I." For the first time, Jamal smiled back. "Keep at it, old man. A foundation for the future." As the months passed, Grayson's grocery began to thrive in ways it never had before. The store became a symbol of resilience and redemption, a testament to the power of accountability and change. Grayson's efforts to rebuild trust didn't erase the past, but they created a foundation for a better future. And for Edward Grayson, that was enough. Redemption comes full circle. Months passed, and Grayson's grocery steadily transformed from a symbol of mistrust into a cornerstone of the Bellwood community. Edward Grayson's journey of redemption was far from over, but the small victories along the way gave him hope that the future could be different. However, the road ahead would present new challenges, forcing Grayson to confront his past in unexpected ways. A community united. The new initiatives Grayson implemented at the store began to take root. The community discount program allowed struggling families to access fresh produce and pantry staples without worry. The cooking classes, which had started as a modest weekly event, expanded into a full-fledged program with themes like healthy eating on a budget and cultural cuisines of Bellwood. Local chefs, teachers, and volunteers took turns leading the sessions, bringing the community together in unexpected ways. One Saturday morning, Darius King arrived at the store for one of the cooking classes. He had been invited to lead a session on quick, nutritious meals, something he had perfected during his years as a busy graduate student. When he entered, he was greeted by a group of excited children and their parents, all eagerly waiting to learn. Grayson stood by the register, observing the scene. Seeing Darius in his store, not as a customer, but as a leader, was a surreal moment. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also a pang of guilt, knowing how close he had come to destroying that relationship. "Darius," Grayson said quietly as the younger man prepared his ingredients, "thank you for doing this." Darius looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. "This isn't just about you, Mr. Grayson. It's about all of us." An unexpected visitor. One rainy afternoon, as the store buzzed with activity, the bell above the door chimed. Grayson looked up to see a woman entering with hesitant steps. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and a weathered coat that had seen better days. Something about her seemed familiar, but Grayson couldn't immediately place her. "Can I help you?" he asked, stepping out from behind the counter. The woman paused, her eyes scanning the shelves. "I'm not sure," she said softly. "I used to shop here years ago. Before everything." Grayson realized who she was. Marcia Bell, the mother of a teenage boy he had falsely accused of shoplifting nearly a decade ago. That incident had driven her family away from the store and left a lasting scar on her relationship with the community. "Mrs. Bell," Grayson said, his voice faltering, "I thank you for coming." Marcia turned to face him, her expression wary. "I've heard about the changes you've made," she said. "People are talking, but I needed to see it for myself." Grayson nodded, his heart pounding. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you and your family. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I'm doing everything I can to make things right." Marcia studied him for a long moment. "My son's grown now," she said finally. "He's doing well, despite everything. But that day in this store, it nearly broke him. And it broke something in me too." Grayson felt a lump rise in his throat. "I can't imagine the pain I caused. But if there's anything I can do now, anything at all, please tell me." Marcia sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop. People deserve to feel safe here." Grayson nodded. "Thank you for giving me a chance." The grand reopening. As the one-year anniversary of the store's transformation approached, the advisory board suggested hosting a grand reopening to celebrate the progress made and reaffirm Grayson's commitment to the community. The event would feature local vendors, music, and activities for families, showcasing the store as more than just a place to shop. Grayson threw himself into planning, determined to make the event a success. On the day of the reopening, the store was unrecognizable. Bright banners hung across the entrance, and a small stage was set up outside for speeches and performances. Vendors lined the sidewalks, selling everything from homemade pastries to handcrafted jewelry. The turnout exceeded expectations. Families mingled, children played games, and neighbors reconnected. The store had become a hub of activity, a far cry from the tense and empty aisles of months past. Grayson stood near the stage, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Monica approached him, her face lit with a smile. "Look at this," she said. "You've come a long way, Edward." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," he replied. This store belongs to everyone now. A powerful speech. When it was time for the speeches, Monica took the stage first, recounting the journey of the past year and emphasizing the importance of accountability and community collaboration. Then she introduced Grayson. The crowd fell silent as he stepped forward. He adjusted the microphone, his hands shaking slightly, but his voice was steady when he began. "Thank you all for being here today," he said. "A year ago, I made a mistake that hurt not just one person but this entire community. I let my fears and assumptions guide my actions, and I failed to see the harm I was causing." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Among the faces, he saw Darius, Monica, Ruth, Marcia, and even Jamal. Each of them had played a part in holding him accountable, and he was deeply grateful. "This past year has been the hardest of my life," Grayson continued, "but it's also been the most meaningful. I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about owning it, learning from it, and doing better every single day." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces a mix of solemnity and hope. "This store isn't mine anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's yours. It's a place where everyone is welcome, where every voice matters. And I promise to keep listening, keep learning, and keep working to make this community stronger." The applause that followed was deafening. For the first time, Grayson felt a sense of closure, not because the work was done, but because he was finally on the right path. A new legacy. In the weeks that followed the grand reopening, Grayson's Grocery continued to thrive. The store became a model for other businesses in Bellwood, inspiring similar efforts to foster inclusion and accountability. Grayson himself was invited to speak at local schools and community events, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. One afternoon, as Grayson was stocking shelves, a young boy approached him with a shy smile. "Mr. Grayson," the boy said, "my mom says you're trying to make things better. She said we should give you a chance." Grayson knelt to the boy's level, his heart swelling with gratitude. "That means the world to me," he said. "Thank you." The boy grinned and ran off to join his mother, who gave Grayson a small nod of encouragement. Grayson stood, watching them with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but he was ready to face them. For the first time in a long time, Grayson's Grocery wasn't just a store. It was a beacon of hope, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, effort, and the courage to change. Building bridges through legacy. The transformation of Grayson's Grocery became a defining chapter in Bellwood's history. The store wasn't just a business anymore. It was a place of connection, healing, and hope. Yet, for Edward Grayson, the journey felt far from over. Every day brought new challenges and reminders of the past, but it also brought opportunities to make a difference. A personal invitation. One morning, as Grayson was reviewing inventory in the back room, Monica Pearson entered the store carrying a stack of flyers. She placed them on the counter and waved him over. "Edward, there's something you should see," she said. Grayson wiped his hands on his apron and joined her at the counter. He picked up one of the flyers and read the bold headline, "Bellwood Youth Leadership Summit, Building a Better Tomorrow." "It's an event for young leaders in the community," Monica explained. "Darius is one of the keynote speakers. He suggested you should attend." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why?" Monica smiled knowingly. "Because your story is a lesson in accountability and growth. These kids need to see that change is possible, even for someone who's made mistakes." The idea of speaking to a room full of young people made Grayson nervous, but he trusted Monica and Darius. He nodded slowly. "I'll be there." The summit. The Bellwood Youth Leadership Summit was held in the community center, where the energy was electric. Young people from all walks of life filled the auditorium, eager to learn from the speakers and workshops. Darius stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding and calm. When he introduced Grayson as the next speaker, the room fell silent. Grayson stepped to the podium, his heart pounding. He scanned the crowd of attentive faces, many of them young and eager, and some older residents curious about what he would say. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here today because I made a mistake. A big one. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and I let my assumptions and biases guide my actions. But I'm also here because I've been given a second chance to do better." He paused, looking directly at the younger audience members. "You'll make mistakes in life. We all do. But what matters is how you respond to them. Will you let your mistakes define you, or will you learn from them and grow?" The room was silent, but Grayson could see the impact of his words on their faces. He continued, sharing the steps he had taken to rebuild trust in his community and the lessons he had learned along the way. As he concluded, he said, "Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you are willing to listen, to learn, and to take responsibility, it's never too late to make things right." The applause that followed was heartfelt and sincere. Grayson stepped down from the stage, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. Darius met him at the edge of the room, a small smile on his face. "You did good," Darius said. "Thanks," Grayson replied. "It means a lot coming from you." A new partnership. In the weeks following the summit, Grayson and Darius began collaborating on a new initiative, a mentorship program for local youth. The program would provide job training, life skills, and opportunities for young people to work in the store or with other local businesses. The mentorship program launched with a small group of 10 students. Grayson personally oversaw their training, teaching them not just the practical skills of running a store, but also the importance of empathy, respect, and community engagement. He found himself growing as much as the students, their enthusiasm and fresh perspectives reigniting his passion for his work. One of the students, a bright teenager named Tyrell, quickly became a stand-up participant. Tyrell reminded Grayson of himself at a younger age, ambitious, headstrong, and eager to prove himself. But Tyrell also had a keen sense of justice and fairness, qualities Grayson deeply admired. "Mr. Grayson," Tyrell said one day as they worked together to organize a shipment, "why do you care so much about this store now? I heard what happened before. Most people would have just given up." Grayson paused, considering the question. "Because I realize this store isn't just mine, Tyrell. It's part of something bigger. It belongs to the people who walk through those doors every day. And it's my responsibility to make sure it's a place where everyone feels welcome." Tyrell nodded thoughtfully. "That's cool. I think I want to own my own business someday. Maybe even a store like this." Grayson smiled. "If that's your goal, I'll do everything I can to help you get there." Closure and new beginnings. One quiet evening, long after the store had closed, Grayson sat alone in the office, going over the day's receipts. The sound of the front door jingling startled him. He looked up to see Marcia Bell standing there, holding a small bag of groceries. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you." Grayson blinked, surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For the mentorship program," she said. "My nephew Tyrell is part of it, and it's been good for him. He comes home excited every day, talking about the things he's learning. It's made a difference." Grayson felt a lump rise in his throat. "Tyrell's a great kid. He's going to go far." Marcia smiled, her expression softening. "Maybe, but part of that will be because someone gave him a chance. So thank you for that." As she left, Grayson sat back in his chair, reflecting on how far he had come. The store wasn't just thriving, it was alive, a beacon of hope and progress in a community that had once turned its back on him. And now, with every new customer, every event, and every mentorship, Grayson was building something